So look, welcome everybody on this beautiful sunny morning to the Advertising Association and ASBOF event, Making Our Constraints Beautiful. And we're going to try and do something audacious in the next sort of 45 minutes or so, which is to prove that apparent restriction, regulation can actually liberate and improve that which it's controlling. And in so doing, we want to reinforce with this important audience that the self-regulation system in the UK, that ASBOF, which is the Advertising Standards Board of Finance, helps fund, is actually a crucial part of the long-term past, present and future success of the industry. I'm Mark Lund, I'm the chair of ASBOF, and I'm also the president of McCann in the UK. And I'm delighted to say I'm joined by a starry set of speakers and panelists. Our speakers are firstly Adam Morgan, founder of the consultancy Eat Big Fish, and probably best known as a global authority on challenger brands and how they succeed. But he's also, as you will see, the author of A Beautiful Constraint, how to turn limitations into advantages. And secondly, Stephen Woodford, the CEO of the Advertising Association, who's at the forefront of ensuring that UK advertising retains and builds its trust and effectiveness. And we've also got two brilliant panelists in Elizabeth Cantor of TikTok and Guy Parker of the ASA, who I'll introduce to you later on. So the order of proceedings is going to run like this. I, in the manner of account men everywhere, I'm going to make some bold assertions as to the power of UK advertising and why good regulation is a crucial part of it. Adam is then going to explain with an elegance and articulacy of which I can only dream the reasons why this actually might be so. And then Stephen will show some very recent research which underpins the role that regulation plays in the UK in the trust that advertising enjoys in this market. And the panel is then going to debate the issues. We may not have time for questions at the end, but if you put questions into the chat box, we're going to come back to you on all of them after the meeting. But let me start with the compelling story of UK advertising success. British advertising, I think, as we all know, punches well above its weight. At 29 billion pounds, it's the fourth biggest advertising market in the world, but comes from the seventh biggest economy. What's more, we export 12 billion pounds worth of value to the rest of the world. And advertising generates a further 100 billion of value to the wider UK economy, and sits at the heart of the UK creative industries, which are themselves one of the three UK growth champions. So this is not just about a vibrant market, though. It's also about the quality of UK advertising. And the reason that it succeeds so well is the quality of that product. And over the last 2 decades, the UK has consistently been in the top 2 nations in the world, both in terms of creative awards and wins at festivals like Cannes, but even more crucially, in the effectiveness awards, things like the Effies and our own IPA awards. And as a final, slightly more inconsequent proof, no fewer than 5 of the world's top 10 advertising networks are actually run currently by Brits. So the equation is very simple. The ads are liked and trusted. Advertising is seen as effective and trusted, and thus the market grows. So far, so good. The controversial bit is that I believe, and I hope that at the end of this, you're going to believe, that the high quality, well-judged, industry-led system of regulation that helps make this possible is a crucial dynamic in this system. So, can regulation really help? Can a constraint be beautiful? Thank heavens, I've got a man here who literally wrote the book. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Adam Morgan, author of A Beautiful Constraint.
Thank you very much, Mark. Mark's given me my own constraint, which is to talk for 20 minutes about a book I spent 18 months writing, which is almost impossible. But anyway, I shall try and revel in it as much as I can. So thank you. Funnily enough, my interest in this subject came from actually Mark and I went to see this man talk at the Mayfair the Curzon Mayfair in London, and Tom Ford was on stage being interviewed by a very gushing journalist from the Times newspaper. And once she'd finished asking him all these questions and he'd started answering them, she turned the question to the crowd and said, okay, well, has anyone got a question for Mr. Ford? And up to now, his body language had been very relaxed. So he's had his arms behind his head. He'd been magnificently unbuttoned, beautifully dressed, talking about his authorial vision and fox terriers and Colin and how close they were and all that kind of thing, and really relaxed and confident. And everybody in the audience was clearly in love with him, and quite rightly so. So anyway, he scans the audience for people who want to ask a question. And I, like a fanboy, have got my hand up at the back. And he says, yes, badly dressed Englishman at the back. And I said, I've heard, Mr. Ford, that you've described your catwalk shows as filmic. What have you learned from the world of fashion that you've applied to film? And what have you learned from the world of film that you've applied to fashion? And the fascinating thing was he didn't answer that question at all. He answered a completely different question. So his body language changed completely. He stopped being this alpha pose and he leant forward and put his legs together and put his hands together. And he said, what you need to understand is that in a catwalk show, you have 13 minutes. He didn't say roughly quarter of an hour, or not a lot of time. He said 13 minutes. And in that 13 minutes, he said, you've got to convince this very cynical, seen-it-all audience that yours is the most exciting fashion vision they've seen that week in Milan or Shanghai or New York or wherever you are. He said, so you have to have a very clear idea of what that vision is, and you have to tell it in a series of compelling acts, were the words he used. So, boom, act one, out you come, and you turn the music up and you turn the lights down, boom, act two, on you go. And then he said the most fascinating thing. He said, my ambition by the end of those 13 minutes is to get the entire audience breathing in and out at the same time. I will know that my catwalk show has been a success if, as the last Romanian supermodel leaves the stage, I can hear the entire audience exhaling at the same time. And what I was struck by that was the relationship between ambition and constraint. Because the natural thing to do with constraints, when faced with constraint, is to lower your level of ambition. Think of that. You could have said, look, we've got 13 minutes. I'm in Shanghai. Anna Winter's in the front row. She's seen 16 of these things already before breakfast. What hope have you got? You do the best you can and you see what you can get away with. He doesn't do that. He raises his ambition in the face of that constraint. And it's the combination of that elevated ambition and that constraint that leads to Boom Act One and that signature theatre that's a Tom Ford catwalk show. So I became really interested in that. I was looking to write a book about challenges in innovation and how to think in a fresh way about innovation. I was very interested in the idea between innovation and constraint. So Mark, my co-author, and I, we went off and there's 72 academic papers about this. We read some of those and paid someone else to read the rest of them. But we interviewed a wide range of people, everything from, yes, designers, that's Michael Beirut in the top left-hand side from Pentagram, Dan Wyden from Wyden and Kennedy about Nike advertising, all the way through to education, agronomy, that's the supply chain director of Unilever in the top right-hand side, shipbuilding. We looked deliberately at a very broad range of areas to see if there were some more general truths in here. And I, of course, as a student of advertising, had read David Ogilvy's famous maxim about give me the freedom of a tight brief. And it occurred to me, well, maybe that is true for David Ogilvy, but maybe there's just some people who are really good at making constraints beautiful, and maybe some of us aren't. So my initial hypothesis was that actually, look, first of all, constraints have a bad rap, that actually we generally think of them as a bad thing and think of them as limitations. If I asked you to free associate with the word constraint now collectively over chat, I'm not asking you to do that, but if we did, most of the words would be to do with restriction. They stop me being all I could be, how much better I would be if I didn't have that constraint. And yet, if we think of ourselves as parents, if we think of ourselves as sports people, if we think of ourselves in terms of the breakthroughs, personal breakthroughs we've made, constraint is at the heart of each of those things, and constraint has been beneficial in each of those things. If we give no constraints to our children, God knows what hell we're going to unleash on ourselves in the world. So constraints actually are a stimulus to better. We just don't think of applying that in a more general and systematic way. And I had two very interesting interviews at the first two interviews that I did. The first was with Michael Beirut at Pentagram, rockstar designer. And I took along to him this brutally simple and crude thesis that, look, I think there are three kinds of people. And these kinds of people are defined by the relationship between ambition and constraint. So a victim is somebody who, when faced with a constraint, reduces their ambition to fit the constraint. Okay, I've got a marketing budget of X. I've got to sell X thousand widgets with that marketing budget. You halve my marketing budget, I'll halve my widget targets for next year because, I'm a victim of that constraint. A neutralizer says, well, look, actually, this ambition is too big to be compromised by the constraint I'm faced. I'll find a way to get through it on a short-term basis. It's what the West Coast calls kludging, just finding a short-term temporary fix. And someone who's more transformative says, that's really interesting. I'm actually, I have to sit back and kind of more globally rethink how I approach this, how I think about marketing, what the role of marketing is, how I think about partnerships, that kind of thing. So my sort of starting point was there are three kinds of people. And what Michael Beirut said to me was actually, that's not the case, Adam. I am a professional creative. I do this all the time for my clients. I recognize I go through each of those three stages myself. When a client gives me a problem with a significant constraint I always think, oh, the bastards, how the hell am I supposed to sort this one out? That's ridiculous. And I stomp around and my lower lip goes a bit wobbly and my staff stay out of the way of me for 2 days. And then after a while, we kind of get together and we think, maybe there's a way through this, you know. And actually, by and large, we come to a more transformative approach because of the nature of that constraint. I don't think he said, these are three kinds of people. I think these are three stages that people go through. And what you need to find is just enough strategy to help people lead their teams through each of these three stages. And interestingly, at the same time, I interviewed a senior engineer at IBM who was involved in AI there. And he made this very interesting assertion, which is kind of antithetical to us as people who worked in the creative business like advertising. He said, basically, he said, Adam, creativity is just a series of strategies, isn't it? And I'd never thought of it like that. And I dare say there's a whole bunch of people, including David Ogilvy and Dan Wyden, who would violently reject that suggestion. But I was intrigued by that. Well, maybe actually inventiveness. If creativity is, maybe inventiveness is a series of strategies. What would that series of strategies look like that could help us take a team and turn limitations into opportunities and make them more beautiful again? So I'm just going to offer, the book that I wrote offers a kind of sort of 6 parts to this. I'm just going to give you a very brief flavor of just 2 of them, just as an illustration. I'm going to tell you a story about, we've applied this, I should say, we've kind of taught this and worked with this with all of Unilever UK, who put themselves through a beautiful constraint. My colleague Mark has taught it to long-range inmates, long-term inmates in San Quentin prison. We've done some work with a school in Canada, and I'm going to tell you about that later on. So just to give a brief flavor of it and why I think it's kind of a reason to be cheerful and optimistic. So the first thing is that I've spent a lot of time in my life taking constraints out of creativity and brainstorming sessions. The basic thesis seems to be that you remove all the constraints and you say, let's imagine we could do anything we wanted to. Now let's think about what kind of moon waffles we could make and how we could advertise them. And you come up with all these wonderful ideas. And actually what happens is, of course, you get to the end of the day, the wall is full of wonderful ideas. You then reintroduce the constraints, everything withers on the vine, except one idea, which you never really liked anyway. And what's interesting about the people who have the big ambition and the significant constraint is they actually put them together. And it's the combination of those two things together that force an entirely new way of thinking. I'm calling this a propelling question because it propels you out of the path that you've pursued up to now. It's that combination of a bold ambition and a significant constraint together. So let me give an example. I had the pleasure of working with Audi a few years ago, and I was sitting next to a group of dealers in Napa at a winery. It was a really good gig, this thing, for all sorts of reasons. And one of them told me this fascinating story about Audi re-entering long-distance racing at Le Mans in the noughties. And they were talking about the fact that the chief engineer gets the engineering team together and talks about how they have to design a new car. And the natural question, clearly, if you're in a race and you're a car manufacturing race, is how can we make the car go faster, right? That's the natural question. So the chief engineer acknowledges that, but he says, but actually, that's not what we're about. We as a brand are about, as a company, about being progressive, if you like. That's our constraint. That's the lens that we have to look through. So let's ask ourselves a more progressive question. How could we win Le Mans, big ambition, with a car that can go no faster than anybody else's, significant constraint? How can we win Le Mans with a car that can go no faster than anybody else's? And of course, you as an engineer at Audi, that's not what you've been doing for the past 6, 7, 8, 10 years, right? You've been trying to make cars go faster if you're working in the racing team. And that's what you do. You've been looking at faster engines and wind tunnels and all that kind of stuff. But he says that's not the question we're going to ask ourselves. So, of course, how do you make the car go, how do you win Le Mans with a car that's no faster than anybody else's? Force them to look in a completely different place for breakthrough. And where they looked, as you can see from this, is the R10 TDI. They introduced diesel technology to long distance racing properly for the first time, which means, of course, that you can stay out on the track longer. So your car can be just as fast, but because you're on the track longer than your competition, you will win the race. And they came 1, 2, 3 on the podium for the next 3 years. But the way he asked that question, that propelling question, taking them out of their comfort zone, out of the kind of paths they'd become dependent on, that forced that breakthrough, that limitation, and that ambition forced that constraint. Sometimes, of course, this constraint is a regulatory constraint. So we worked actually on the launch of the A8 in the States, and this was the S8. And actually, to launch the S8, they had to produce a car that was significantly faster than the car that they kind of launched last time, otherwise the customer wouldn't buy it. It also had to be more fuel efficient. Now, historically, in terms of petrol engine cars, this was a kind of contradiction in terms. You're either kind of faster and less fuel efficient, or the other way around. And so they had to produce a car that was faster and more fuel efficient. And well, I'll tell you how they did it in a minute. So the point about this is you need to actually not to keep your ambition high, elevate ambition, then ask yourself the question that links those two things together. Cognitive scientists will tell you that this is a productively uncomfortable way for the brain to think, because it doesn't believe those two things should belong together, and it forces you to question the underlying assumptions about the relationships between those two things. The second part of that, obviously, is that if you're going to ask a question like this, you need to have a kind of a strategy for helping your team answer it. And I worked with a very interesting guy called Colin Kelly, who at the time was the chief technical officer of Warburton's Bakery and was trying to reinvent what they call the Chorley Wood method, the baking process that the UK has used for the past 60, 70 years. And he said this very interesting thing to me. He said, I never allow my teams, when we're facing a difficult problem, to start a sentence with the words "we can't because." I make them start the sentence with the words "we can if." And that's actually probably one of those profoundly useful things I've heard in the last 20 years, because it does 3 very important things, doesn't it? The first is it keeps all the energy on the question that we're trying to answer, which is how can we solve this problem, rather than letting it drift into another conversation, which is this a problem that can be solved? Secondly, the story that it tells about ourselves culturally is that we are people who find ingenious answers and inventive answers to difficult problems. And thirdly, it keeps optimism and inquisitiveness alive in the problem right at the initial outset. And there's so much evidence around resourcefulness and grit, as you know, that says that the more optimism you can bake into the front end, the more likely your team are to be able to hurdle the speed bumps that come further down the line. So anyway, the book explores a kind of map with a kind of range of different possibilities on it. All I'll note is that almost every one of the 35 interviews that we looked at had a can-if solution at its heart. And if you look at, for instance, the Audi engine question that I just asked you about the S8, their can-if was, we can if we mix together 3 technologies we already have but haven't put together so far. They had a turbocharging technology, a lightweight engine breakthrough, and some third thing that I'm blanking on that they put together for the first time. And that allowed the S8 to be a full second faster from 0 to 60 and 40% more fuel efficient in traffic. So that they allowed it to deliver it because that ambition, that constraint traveled together. So let me tell you briefly about this school, because we all tend to think, oh yeah, but that Mark is doing easy in cars, right? Easy in agronomy, easy for the supply and director of Unilever. So this is a story about some school children at this secondary school. So if you fly to Vancouver and drive 5 hours east, you'll come to this particular secondary school. And the teacher there during COVID wanted to teach a business class, an elective business class, voluntary business class at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Thursday. And he decided for some reason he would teach them a beautiful constraint. And so these poor Canadian students got up early in the darkness and cold of a Canadian winter and went in to be taught about a beautiful constraint, thinking it was all rather theoretical. And then they came to an interesting moment, which was Halloween. Every Halloween, they have a Halloween food drive. And the food drive gathers food from the local community that goes into the food bank that is then there for the difficult Christmas period for those that really need it, including the homeless. So they hit this kind of roadblock where they thought, well, we can't do that this year. We knock on people's doors, we collect food. They're not going to want to open doors to strangers at this particular time. So initially they thought, well, we just can't do it this year. And then one 17-year-old, Jessica, said, you know what, this is too important not to do something. So let's try and apply the principles of beautiful constraint to our Halloween food drive. So their propelling question was a combination of bold ambition and significant constraint. How can we have a successful house-to-house food drive when nobody wants to open their doors to us? So they just literally played it out. They just did a can-if exercise. Can-if exercise was, we won't knock on the door, we'll leaflet drop in advance, and we'll ask them to leave whatever they've got in boxes on their doorstep. Quite simple. And what they found was that if you do that, people leave more stuff on their doorstep than they would have given you spontaneously. So you get more food. And secondly, because you're not having to chat to all of them, much though you like them, you're not having to chat to Mrs. Snooks and Mr. London, all the rest of it as you go around. You know how Mr. London bangs on when he opens his door to you. You get round much faster. You finish your rounds. So the next two charts are their charts, okay? So in 2020, on the right, in 1 year, they collected as much food as they had in the previous 4 years put together. More food, in fact. So what's interesting about this is that using a limitation to force breakthrough creates unexpected benefits. They would have been happy to get the same stuff, but it's unexpected benefits. And of course, once you've collected food like this, they're not going to go back to collecting food the old way. This is a breakthrough for them, a small breakthrough for them that they will never unforget. And this again is Jessica's chart, okay, of herself. She said, we started off in that victim stage. Let's give up. This is too difficult. It's COVID. And they said, well, no, the ambition is too important. We'll try and be good as last year. What they found was that actually that limitation forced them to be even better. So there are two ways you can look at this, right? The first is to say, look, that's interesting. I need to just reframe my kind of mindset in the face of regulation or anything else. Constraints actually are the spur to better. If I can have just enough strategy to help my team get there, how can we make this constraint beautiful? I'll give you one further example. So my sister-in-law is a brewer's daughter, Brains Brewery. Brains, very famous example, as you might remember it. They had to, a few years ago, go and play in France at the Parc des Princes. And you're not allowed to wear kind of sponsorship from an alcohol company on French television. So they simply changed the logo on the front to this, which is genius, right? How much better that is than simply having brains all the time. The limitation forced an improvement, you might argue, and a sort of witty improvement in what they did. And I'll just finally leave it. I mean, it's a cultural thing, this, and we as a culture need to understand and lean into this. So look at where Nike has been with constraints. So on the left-hand side, you can see Phil Knight being doorstepped by Michael Moore about working conditions in kind of Southeast Asian factories, and him saying, not my problem. Not my problem. You know, it's not. We're just here to help athletes. It's not our problem to sort out the problems of Southeast Asia. Have to face into it. Have to respond to pressure. Next along is the Nike Air Max. So German pressure group said, look, you're using sulfur hexafluoride in your shoes on the heels. That's meaning that effectively Nike shoes are selling so many, you're selling so many of these things. It's the same as having 1 million cars on the road. You've got to do something about this. It took them a number of years to solve it. Effectively, their solution was to have a new sealing solution with nitrogen in that then allowed them to take it from just the heel to the entire foot. So the breakthrough forced by that constraint led to their most successful shoe ever and a better quality of impact protection for the customer. You then look at waste solution with the fly knit shoe, them leaning into the fact that actually rather than reducing water and dyeing, let's take all water out of dyeing. So they've got a waterless dyeing process that they partner with Adidas. And what their journey has been is to say, we had a series of one-offs that were forced on us. It's now transformed us actually into thinking, this is something we should be pursuing actively and looking for and imposing on ourselves. We go hunting for constraints because it makes us better. This is not a unique thing to the advertising business. Big companies are happening all around us. And our success in doing it as businesses, as individuals, as citizens of the planet is going to define our health and happiness and success in our future, and indeed all our children's. Thank you.
Adam, that was fantastic. Thank you very much. And I think, you know, a kind of really powerful distillation of why good regulation, whether, you know, self-imposed or imposed from outside, can actually be a way of raising ambition. So what I'd like to do now is come on to the next part of the argument, because, you know, if we say, right, good regulation can actually improve the product, that it can raise ambition, it can make a more innovative and in some cases elegant solution. The crucial thing then is, okay, we've got better advertising, but does the way that people react to that advertising also get influenced by the regulation and the knowledge of that regulation. So what if the fact that people knew that regulation was there and was working in a very effective way actually improved the willingness of consumers everywhere to act on the message they saw because they trusted them more? And that's really what I would like to ask Stephen Woodford, CEO of the Advertising Association, to talk about, because that is exactly the work that the AAA and Stephen have been doing, curious enough, in Scotland. But let me pass over to him and he will tell you more.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you, Adam. And hearing that overview of the beautiful constraint makes me realise that actually that's what my entire career has been, actually. And that's, I think, a lot of the day-to-day work, not just in agencies or across all business, because you've never got unlimited resources. You've always got challenges to do. And actually it's the leaning into these things and embracing them that is such a liberating thing. So I'm going to talk about trust in advertising, and this is a long-term problem, and it is something that we at the AA, with all of our members, particularly with the IPA and ISBA, we work shoulder to shoulder on this, decided not to accept. Why accept that trust is in long-term decline? Let's do something about it. So if I can ask Phoebe to share the charts. I'll just do a quick scene setter and then talk about, in effect, how we've responded to this challenge. Phoebe, you. Hopefully that's coming up. But one of the things the AA has been doing for some years, in fact decades, is tracking public trust in advertising. So we are able to see what the long-term trends are. And in 2018, we were well, in fact, started before this, in about 2015, 16, we were hitting a low point. And in 2018, we did the biggest piece of research that's ever been done on public trust in advertising. And the first thing, I think, was to really understand why this is the case. So you can see here, this chart here will show, go back to 1993, a long-term just drift downwards, and then you'll see an uptick in the late, from about 2017 onwards. So this was favourability towards advertising in general. So some element of recovery there. And then if you go to the next chart, Phoebe, you can see that on a 3-year average basis, that actually 2015 was our low point, and total trust in the advertising industry has actually come up. So that long-term decline, when we started doing our work and doing our research, we saw actually this thing start to improve. Now, I'd love to say this was the research effect, the fact that we were going out and talking to lots of consumers may have had an impact, but of course it wasn't. What was actually happening was, you'll see on the next chart, and this we think is a post-Brexit effect. Phoebe, you can click to the next chart, please. Trust in all the industries that we were tracking had improved. And in effect, what was happening with advertising, there was a rising tide and it was floating all the boats. We were still bottom of the pack. But I think the interesting thing about this chart is when you look at 2010, we weren't quite the bottom of the pack. Advertising is the thick blue line at the bottom. And if you go back further in time, we were around we were never top of the pack, but we were sort of bottom third of the pack. I think the other really interesting one to look at is the grey line and the green line. So in the mid-teens, around 2013, 2014, banking and the energy industry were trusted less than advertising. Now, it's not surprising, banking, when you think about the post-financial crash, the grey line bumping on the bottom, but they have recovered. They have recovered and they've gone to the middle of the pack. So we looked particularly at the banking industry and looked at what they had done and what was, in a sense, the secret of their success. And if you think about banking post the crash, a lot of the big banks went back to basics. They went back to saying, we're about serving our customers, mainly, on high streets and business and so on. And we are, in a way, there's quite a lot of mea culpa and eating of humble pie. I think NatWest did that particularly well. And they've seen really strong recoveries in trust. So what's our equivalent here in advertising? And I think it's to really think about what we have. So we looked at all of the factors coming out of the research, and we looked at all the various reasons, both the positives and the negatives that were driving trust. And we've got exhaustive analysis of those, which many of the AA members will have heard us. And if you came to our Trust Summit in October, you'd have heard us talk about these. So we know that there's a lot that is positive, there's a lot that's negative. It's actually quite hard to fix a lot of these things. These are systemic things that are to do with the way that the industry works, the growth of advertising in the economy, and so on. It's not to say that we shouldn't try and tackle those, but we felt there was one really important thing that we had not done well. And if you think about Adam's talk about the bold ambition and the significant constraint. So the bold ambition was to, in effect, run an advertising campaign for the ASA as if it were a paid-for campaign, as if we had £5 or £6 million a year to spend on advertising. The ASA does not have £5 or £6 million a year to spend on advertising. It has nothing to spend on advertising because everything that is raised via the ASBOF levy is spent on running the service itself. So in the past, there's been pro bono donations from media owners that added up to about 3 or 4 million a year. But of course, they were scattergun across the year, no particular laydown, no particular multimedia effects, and creative that changed every couple of years. There was no long-term, all the things that you'd expect if you were building a brand. None of those were happening with the ASA. So our bold ambition was in effect to run a campaign as if it were a paid campaign with a sort of 50% upweight on the running rate, with a really strong multimedia creative execution and strong integration between the media channels. And to do that, obviously, with the significant constraint of actually having no money. So we were entirely dependent on the goodwill of the media owners and our ability to make an argument that this was worth a test. And the media owners were fantastic, led by STV in Scotland, who were the first ones to commit. All the Scottish and national media owners really got behind this campaign. And we had a very successful campaign in Scotland, very strong, simple, creative, featuring famous end lines. I'm hoping you're all going to see this, for those of you who've not seen it in Scotland, in the new year, when I hope we can repeat the test nationally. So nice, strong creative, and it really had an impact. If we look at the next chart, I think actually, Phoebe, just click on one further. You can see some really terrific results from this. So trust in the ASA amongst those who saw the ads. So that if you look at the 59% versus 46%. So the people who didn't see the ads trusted the ASA at the 46% level. Those who did, 59%. So almost a third more. This is after one burst of advertising. Those of you familiar with running brand campaigns will know that these sorts of shifts in a brand are stunning, to get that sort of shift in attitude from one burst of advertising. The second chart, I think, shows this even more starkly. Phoebe, if you can click on. So the mid-blue line is the bar chart, rather, is those who saw and heard the ASA ads. The red is all adults, and the dark blue is those who didn't see the ads. And what you can see is, if you look at the column on the left, trust in the ad industry, 70% across the whole population. 14% of those who didn't see the ads, 23%, so a third higher, 50% higher amongst those who saw the ads, trust in the ad industry. I tend to trust most adverts, a third higher. I tend to, generally speaking, I feel positively towards the advertising industry. So 32 plays 22, fantastically strong results after one campaign. So I think this was an example both of, I hope, Adam, this would be a modest footnote in a case history if we were going to do one in the future, in terms of using a beautiful constraint to great effect. The rallying of the media owners behind this campaign to provide, in effect, a pro bono campaign as if it were a paid campaign was terrific. The agencies, Mediacom in Edinburgh, Leith, all provided their services for free. So that, again, was a constraint on us, that they again, treated us as if we were a paying client and turned around a great campaign for us. And most importantly, we've had a terrifically strong result from this. So it did show us that actually, rather than just rely on the rising tide of all industries and remain bottom of the pack, I think we have got here in this data, and I hope we can replicate this on a national level. And by doing it at a national level, we'll have a second burst in Scotland. So I hope we'll see that ratcheting up that you'd hope to see in a brand building campaign as you go into the second year and so on, is that we can actually, by telling people, in effect, about the beautiful constraint that the ad industry operates under, we can build trust and favorability in the advertising industry. And I think, of course, that what we're telling people, why does this work? Because we're telling them a very simple message that every ad that you see in every media is regulated by the ASA, and it has to be legal, decent, honest, and truthful. Extraordinarily simple message, but an incredibly compelling one. And I think that constraint on the industry, to always be legal, decent, honest, and truthful, is an enormously powerful thing. And possibly where we've been remiss in the past is not telling the public that we operate under this system. It doesn't cost the taxpayer anything. It's all paid for by the advertisers. The whole system abides by it. It means that we have something. It's like, I think in many ways, it's the jewel in the crown of our UK advertising industry. And I know it's been admired and basically replicated all around the world. So something we can be extraordinarily proud of, this constraint on our industry. And I hope that we can see the impact of this perhaps this time next year when we are looking at following up a national campaign. Okay, thank you very much. Mark, back over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephen. And I think some really good sort of news there, and sort of some really important sort of evidence that we hope to replicate, as Stephen says, on a national basis. With the help of the industry, and it must be said that this is a kind of it's very important, as Stephen said, to think of this as a whole industry effort, because effectively the reason the market works is because everyone gets engaged, everyone gets involved, and the reason that self-regulation works is because everyone gets engaged. And Stephen's absolutely right to highlight the enormous help we've had from all sorts of media owners over the last sort of year in doing this, and we very much hope that that's going to be continued into next year. So right, let's now move on to the panel, and I'm delighted to add to Adam and Stephen two other faces. Elizabeth Cantor is Director of Government Relations for UK and Ireland, and also Netherlands and Israel, but that's less relevant to us for TikTok, and has been a sort of a very powerful figure in the world of public policy and government affairs for a little while in this market and in America as well. And Guy Parker is CEO of the Advertising Standards Authority, the kind of body that sits at the heart of the self-regulation industry or organization, and he's also this year president of the International Council for Advertising Self-Regulation, which I think is a sort of sign of both Guy's kind of prestige in the sort of the ecosystem and the UK's as well. So let me start, Elizabeth, with you, because we're talking about here a self-regulation system in the UK that's been around for 40 years. TikTok is a sort of not even an adolescent; it's probably a child by comparison. But its success has been meteoric. But along with other sort of great media owners like Google, like Facebook, TikTok has wanted to get involved with self-regulation this year. Can you tell us why it was important for you to kind of come in and want to be part of it?
Well, thank you so much for having me today. And I guess we're about 3 years old, so I suppose we're a little toddler now. But I think really, as others have said, and Stephen has just said, that if as everyone here knows, if the public doesn't trust online advertising, that it will cease to be effective. And we believe that working closely with organizations and regulators like the ASA is really central to establishing the trust, and by extension, creating a sustainable future for digital advertising, which clearly is the foundation of the way in which TikTok functions. As Stephen has said, of course, that if people are confident that they can trust the messenger, they'll trust the messenger. Sorry, the message, they'll trust the messenger, meaning that effective self-regulation is really a win-win for TikTok, our advertisers, and our consumers. And I think it's also been said, and as you've just said, the ASA has been an effective system for decades. We may only be a toddler, but we believe that our engagement with the ASA has really demonstrated that they've adapted with the times since they began in 1975. And the role of the ASA is really to ensure that advertisers conform to a legal, decent, honest, and truthful standard. One of the other things that we've observed over the decades since 1975, of course, is the mass digitization of media. And we've seen that the ASA's work has massively increased and had to adapt to these changes over time in terms of the companies they deal with, the size and the scope of the companies, the nature of the companies being international, or in some cases, just national. So we really do see it as an important, that as a growing player in this evolving market, that we contribute via ASBOF to ensure that the advertising self-regulatory system flourishes, and that, of course, we always put consumers first. And I think in the next section, we'll talk about some of the work we've done to help educate our consumers about advertising. But really, in short, we wholeheartedly support the self-regulatory system and very happily contribute to ASBOF to support that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Elizabeth. Or Liz, indeed, I should say. And Guy, I mean, moving to you, I mean, you know, again, we're sort of part of, as Liz was just alluding to, a rapidly sort of digitizing media and social environment. And that's meant that the ASA has had to innovate hugely over recent years to kind of be in line with those consumers and that sort of ecosystem. Can you give me a couple of examples of the things that you're doing now, which are kind of at the forefront of that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if the industry's beautiful constraint is us, then our beautiful constraint is the scale challenge of regulating online advertising, paid ads, unpaid ads, influencer ads, run by tens, even hundreds of thousands of businesses, and often with limited or no media or platform gatekeepers. So that's a huge challenge for us to take on. For unpaid website and social media claims, we've used tech to capture tens of thousands of dodgy organic Instagram ads for illegal prescription-only medicines like Botox, so we can get them taken down. Really good example, I think, of the scale challenge here. There are tens of thousands of beauty clinics and beauticians who just don't know that it's against the law to advertise Botox to the public, and why would they? There's so much Botox around. We're currently using our data science capability to monitor and filter environmental claims on energy and heating company websites as part of our climate change and the environment project. For online paid ads, we built avatars that mimic the browsing behavior of different aged children, so primary school children, 10 to 12-year-olds, teenagers, and so on, so that we can capture and analyze and tackle age-inappropriate ads for products and services like alcohol, gambling, HFSS foods, where there are rules in the codes that say you can't target them at under 18s or under 16s. And that responds to the programmatic constraint, if I can call it that. How do we know which ads are being served and to whom, given that if we go to the same webpage at the same time, we will be served different ads? Our avatar monitoring is world leading. It's now being copied in other markets. We built a scam ad predictor that predicts the likelihood that online paid ads are scam ads, so that we can alert platforms and DSPs to them. And for influencer ads, we're exploring technology at the moment that will help us capture and filter influencer content, including ephemeral stories that get taken down after 24 hours, so that we can tackle unlabeled influencer ads at greater scale. So, I mean, the theme throughout this is our investment in and our use of tech, either through our own data science capability or by working with third-party tech providers. It's right at the heart of our strategy.
No, that's great. Thanks very much, Guy. And Adam, just coming back to you. I mean, sort of looking at the the industry that you used to be in a long time ago, and hearing what's been said today. What do you think we've got to keep doing to make sure the constraint remains beautiful as opposed to an onerous burden?
I think it's all about how you frame it, isn't it? I mean, my experience of helping people understand that limitations are a stimulus to constraints, it's the way you frame it that's key. So I think, Guy and I were kind of talking about this beforehand. Your very first agency, Collins, Mark, the Benson and Hedges advertising, cigarette advertising, was the award-winning stuff it was because of the regulations currently at the time surrounding cigarette advertising. I interviewed Dan Wyden about the Nike work, and you would argue that Nike is possibly the most consistently famous and brilliant advertiser in the world. he said the one time they took all constraints away from themselves and gave themselves a completely open brief in the mid-90s was the one advertising and commercial disaster they had in their relationship with Nike. Constraints, he said, are absolutely the heart of us producing great work. And it's just a question, I think, of how we frame it. And you would argue that, you know, the real issue facing the advertising business today is not actually regulation, it's creativity. If you read Orlando Wood, if you read Peter Field, it's the decline in creativity. And if you see constraints actually as the stimulus to greater creativity, and therefore perhaps part of the solution to that issue, then that becomes in a completely different and more exciting frame to see it through, I think.
Yeah, no, and look, and I think that's a great, it's a great impetus and encouragement to us. And actually, talking of that, you know, that creativity side, as we move, you know, into trying to get different ages of consumer, you know, interested in sort of why advertising works and why they should trust it. Liz, going back to you, you've been sort of doing a kind of TikTok collaboration with the ASA. Can you talk a bit about how you sort of tried to bring some of, you know, what makes TikTok special to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can just quickly point to two different things that we did to educate our user base. Our users are about 18 to 30 is the average age. But in terms of the partnership with the ASA, we worked with the ASA to create 9 TikTok videos that not 9 TikTok videos, worked with 9 TikTok creators. So if you go onto TikTok, you see that the ASA has an account. And what we really wanted to do was use these creators to do really in a TikTok way, which is really authentic and kind of fun, to raise awareness of the ad rules and to try and support other creators who are posting content on TikTok to ensure that they stick with the rules that they must comply with. So we gave each creator a topic for them to create a TikTok video around. It was around food and body image, misleadingness. I'm not really sure that's a word, but the misleading nature sometimes of advertising. And then we also gave them guidance on what the ad rules say. So the 9 creators created TikTok videos, a whole series of videos that are really creative yet informative, which I guess is really the TikTok way of doing things. And what we tried to do with these videos is not only to educate about these topics such as food or body image, but really to help the videos we feel are really helping to make the CAP code come to life for creators by making some of the key CAP code rules accessible while maintaining the authenticity that is really so crucial to TikTok's success. The other thing we did, which we are really excited about, is we partnered with MediaSmart to produce a collection of resources for 13 to 17-year-olds to understand how advertising works on TikTok, how to spot an ad on TikTok. And these resources are being used in schools for that particular age group, so they can be a bit more savvy when they engage with ads. So I'd love to share a link to that MediaSmart work, and I'll just put it in the chat. But both come up very organically on TikTok, and they feel very authentic to the platform. But they do a really good job, I think, of educating our community about ads.
Brilliant, thanks, Liz. Have a look, because it's a really good example. And Stephen, just to finish us off, because we've literally got 1 minute left to our allotted time. What's you're kind of coordinating this probably more than anyone. What's the bit that you're most proud of that we're doing at the moment, and what do you want us to do more of as an industry?
Well, I think the thing I'm most proud of actually is the fact that everybody has embraced the challenge. You know, and I mean, the ASA test campaign in Scotland is one example of it, but across all the actions we've seen from all of our members who are involved in the Trust Working Group and beyond, is everybody really embraces the challenge. I don't think anybody feels sort of blasé or just fatalistic about, you know, this decline in trust. And I think, as an example, I think the work that TikTok are doing is fantastic. You know, just take the messaging into the platform about the fact that advertising is well regulated. That's a really good initiative, and the more we see innovations like that, I think the work that the ASA is doing in terms of using technology, you know, I see it. So the biggest thing I think is the complete absence of any complacency or fatalism about this. So I think that's something we should be hugely positive about, and I think we see the same actually around the 2 other big challenges that we're working with our members on for the industry, which is sustainability and better inclusion. I mean, both of those things, as well as trust in advertising, we see an extraordinary amount of dissatisfaction and desire to change and make things better.
Mm.
And that gives me great optimism and pride.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And look, the fact is that this has been a tremendous event, and thank you very much to the speakers and the panelists for making it such a high quality and kind of innovative and and kind of provocative 45-50 minutes. We see this as being sort of, it's the start of and continuation of a debate as opposed to a one-off. So what we're trying to do very much is to get the idea that self-regulation is at the heart of our UK advertising success into the sort of the law of the industry. And if there are questions, if there are kind of thoughts, we'd love to hear them. So either to me, or to Stephen, or to Guy, or to Rachel, just reach out. We love to talk. Thank you very much for coming this morning, and thank you very much for being such a good audience. And again, thanks to all who spoke.